All right, welcome back. This is our last approach to personality. You know that we are going to be looking at disorders yet before we finish up with our final exam, but this is our last approach to personality, but certainly not the least. Okay? And it's not surprising that this is actually my favorite approach. Because, as you know, I'm a social and a personality psychologist, and my area of specialty within social psychology is social cognition. So how we think about ourselves and others, thought processes, reflecting ourselves and others. Okay. So the focus here, of course, is thought processes. And what do we mean by that? Well, people really differ in their experiences and their beliefs. People really differ in their values and even in the way that they process information. Okay? Those are all examples of thought processes. Think about that information processing, right? There are a lot of different processes involved in that, such as we really differ in what we pay attention to, what gets our attention, right? What do we think about? And we differ in how we interpret the very same information. Okay? So, if you mention the color red, a famous artist once said, everybody gets a different shade of red in their head, right? So we really differ in how we interpret the same information, and then we really differ in memory. Okay? So there are a lot of different thought processes here to study. And those are some examples. Now, remember that computer metaphor. So for the cognitive approach, remember the humanistic psychologists kind of backlashed against it using the Turing test to show the limitation that this is not a great metaphor for the brain as a whole, which would include your personality, right? But it really is a great metaphor for information processing, that particular set of processes. Okay, couldn't be a better one. And so if you don't remember this is fair game for the last test because this is the cognitive approach. However, we covered this in detail when we looked at it from the humanistic approach. So you want to review those notes if you don't remember this well. Okay, so George Kelly is the first person to really leave a footprint, in other words, have an impact on the study of personality from a cognitive approach. And we're going to run over his theory here. So you read about this, okay? And let's see if we can kind of solidify that more for you. George Kelly's whole theory revolves around this idea of personal constructs. Personal constructs. And I want you to think of that word constructs and I want you to think of it as large, because it's going to help you keep him apart from, keep this teased apart from Albert Ellis's irrational beliefs, which are coming up later. Okay? So constructs are bigger, they're broader. Okay, so personal constructs are beliefs about the world in general, broadly, in general. So an example of that would be somebody might have a belief that people are generally trustworthy, or they might have the opposite belief, that people are generally not trustworthy, right? That's a super good review question for you. When do you think that default is established in life? And if you remembered the first year, that's great, because you got that all the way back in the psychodynamic approach. And then more recently, I believe we reviewed it also. Okay. But that first year of life. But that would be an example. Another example of a personal construct would be that the world is unjust, or the world is just. And see how those are really broad? They include all people, or they include the world, right? George Kelly pointed out that research shows that we are interpersonally attracted to others who share similar personal constructs. And oftentimes these people make the best friends or the best romantic partners, people who share them, because we better understand each other then, right? And this is really cool though, because it also goes to show that people can have very different personalities even though they have had the same experiences. They've come from a similar background. And the way that they would then have very different personalities is that they experienced all of that through different personal constructs. So you're kind of experiencing it or seeing the world through the lens of these constructs. Okay? And likewise, similar people can have really similar personalities, even though they have very different experiences, because they experience them through very similar personal constructs. So, very cool way of explaining that and looking at who we are most attracted to. You read about his fundamental postulate, okay? Kind of meaning the main thesis, of his viewpoint. What does everything rest on? And I think it might be a little convoluted in your reading, so let me simplify that for you, because it also is very cool. And really is the underlying, this helps to explain, this is underneath all of his theory, okay? The fundamental postulate just goes like this: a person sees and interprets the world through their own lens of their personal constructs. So you're looking at the world, you're experiencing it through these personal constructs. Everything. So it's going to affect all kinds of cognitive processes. What it is you pay attention to, it's going to affect how you interpret things sometimes differently than other people who have different personal constructs, even though you're interpreting the same stimulus. And what you have memory for, and so on. Now, let's add some things here. So, where George Kelly goes with this, hey, he talks about the fact that we are always testing our personal constructs. So we're like little detectives in the world, right? And we're holding them up to see how well they match reality. And that's just something that we do every day. In other words, our brains are so programmed to simply make sense of things that we even do it when we sleep. So you have random firing going on in your brain, random firing, and yet it's your brain's full-time job to try to piece those different sensory inputs and such, that come through the random firing into a coherent story, a dream. You might say, my dreams are not coherent. Well, it's doing the very best it can with the material, right? Okay, so George Kelly claimed that this is something we do through life as we're experiencing the world through our personal constructs. And they are guiding how we react to things, how we interpret them, how we react to them. And if they're faulty, they are not going to help us to predict the world. And if they don't help us to predict the world well, if they don't match reality well, then they're not going to inform us on how to respond in certain situations and so on. And this can lead to psychological problems. Okay, so the shorthand for that is that faulty personal constructs can lead to psychological problems. Okay? So these problems arise when the personal constructs are either faulty or they can be really unflexible, stubborn even though they're not working, or somebody really might have a lack of personal constructs. So they might have a lack of experiences on which to build personal constructs. But you probably guessed then the primary goal of cognitive therapy is to help the person construct more reality-matching constructs, whether they're replacing them or whether they're replacing faulty ones or whether they're constructing them from new, right? To help the person construct more reality-matching personal constructs. And he's come up with a really cool therapy with this, but we're going to wait and look at that later on in this lecture. Right now, we are going to move to Albert Ellis.